I made that decision, and 2 weeks after that, it hit the top 100 list. You have this belief. So when I was 18, I have this belief that I'm a socially anxious person. Within 7 months, it ends up becoming the #1 Minecraft server in the world. I go from, and this is me at 15, I go from, this kid, immigrant background, didn't really, have too much money to, afford to buy things that I want, to, making hundreds of thousands of dollars, being quote unquote self-made.
Welcome back to another inspiring episode of the Heart Healthy Hustle podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Frederick. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to wish you a Merry Christmas Eve and Happy Holidays. Hopefully you are getting some time with your family, your friends. An insight into brilliant athletes, Tom Brady, Michael Jordan, for example. Them performing well is expected of them. Them being consistent is expected of them. It's their job, right? That's why Tom Brady often, Belichick, coach would tell him, do your job. And to Tom Brady, that's doing what is expected of him. Performing consistently at an excellent level is what is expected. Michael Jordan sinking threes was expected. He had that expectation of himself. Today we are hosting Mark Metry. Mark was born in Boston, Massachusetts on July 22nd, 1997 as a first-generation immigrant from Egypt. Both of his parents came to the United States in 96 with just a couple $100 in their pocket. Mark got his first job sweeping floors, cleaning tables, and taking orders from customers at his dad's pizza store. In 2009, he saved enough money to buy a laptop and an iPhone. That was the start of Mark's online learning journey, where he learned how to code, develop, and build websites and mobile applications. After that, Mark started his own YouTube channel around video games at the age of just 13 in 2010 and grew that to over 35,000 subscribers. Mark is the founder and current operator for VU Dream, a growing and innovative virtual and augmented reality marketing and advertising agency based in Boston. And just for fun, Mark hosts a top 100 podcast called Humans 2.0. On this show, Mark converses with billionaires, New York Times best-selling authors, and world-class human beings like Seth Godin, Ed Milet, and Dave Asprey, just to name a few. Mark, my man, welcome to the show.
Jonathan, you are the absolute best, man. Thank you so much for having me on your show. I'm literally so excited.
I'm stoked, Mark. We start out the show with a favorite success quote. So, Mark, share with my audience what you got and what it means to you.
Life won't always go your way, but you will always find a way. And it sounds simple, and it is unbelievably simple. But to me, when I hear that, it gives me the thoughts of, okay, I am a quote unquote, young entrepreneur. I'm somebody that's trying to get out there and make stuff happen. And any kind of, interpersonal, internal or external journey, it usually always takes more time than we expect. At least for me, I kind of felt the pressure of always, going 120% of the time, when in reality that actually was causing psychological stress that actually made me work less, which actually goes against the entire notion, philosophy of hustling really hard. So when I say that, it calms me down and it makes me realize that, I may not know any of the answers. I may not know, the 40-year game plan that God has in store for me, but I know it's going to be okay, and I'm just going to take it one step at a time. So that is my favorite motto, man.
Share with us what your day-to-day looks like for Mark.
For me, I've really gotten intentional about a morning routine just over the last 2.5 years. And, it always changes. I'm always experimenting, but it usually starts off with me gaining consciousness, me awaking in the morning. And what I've been trying to do is the first thought that I am consciously having, I try to make it about how I am super grateful that I am alive. The fact that I survived today. So the fact that I made it and the fact that you made it, it's like it freaks my mind out. Like I'm just like, holy crap, like I'm actually alive here. And unlike, unfortunately, the 100,000 people that died this morning, I am not one of them, which gives me the opportunity to look for more opportunities. And then from that point on, I also like to take a moment and get in touch with my body. Just kind of, feel, and this is still while I'm in bed, feel my body, be mindful about it. See if there's anything that I should maybe give a focus on today within my mind-body connection. And then I also think about visualizing what I'm going to be doing that day, and then also visualizing maybe potential dreams. This is a time where I let my imagination run wild. And it's actually where I come up with a lot of interesting ideas between that moment of still kind of stumbling in sleep and waking consciousness. And then from that point on, there's some other things I think about, like every morning, I say to myself, the world is conspiring in my favor to make Humans 2.0 and all the other ventures that I'm working on in my life a success that actually impacts people. Those are some of the fundamental beliefs that I have that end up shaping my day. And after that, it's usually balance of doing some yoga, stretching, mindfulness meditation, writing my thoughts down, figuring out what I have to do, maybe reading a little bit, and then definitely entering in some kind of exercise component. And from that point on, I take my shower, I drink my bulletproof coffee, and my day gets started where I literally pinch myself every day. I get to do what I want. Like right now in my schedule, at noon, I get to talk to you, which I literally love being on other podcasts. In the morning, I had a podcast interview with John Lee Dumas. I look at my schedule here and it's like,
for any of the listeners who don't know, John Lee Dumas is the most legendary podcast ever. It's called EO Fire, Entrepreneurs on Fire.
Yeah, man. And it's just like, it's like when you get to talk to people like that, when you get to talk to people like Ed Milet, when you get to do like awesome business things, when you get to create content on social media, when you get to do speaking, when you get to like Skype into other people's classrooms, which has happened a lot.
That's so
cool. It's crazy, man. And like, of course, there's the things throughout the day that I don't want to do, or sometimes I may not be in the mood to do them, but it's just like, it's all about, those incremental improvements and just going after the North Star with your true intention. But yeah, man, that's my life. I'm also trying to do a little bit more traveling now. I'm actually in the middle of writing a book, so I've been having the need to carve out some more alone, quiet time for myself. And it's not how every day looks, but generally speaking, usually the mornings and the nights always look the same.
The first thing I want to ask you is, how do you stop thinking or playing small? Why don't we just say play bigger? How do you, and I know you know what I mean by this, when you really start to think like, why not me? Why not me? Like, why can't I speak on stage about podcasting or about Minecraft or about web development or about virtual reality? Why can't I call into classrooms and influence young people? You are doing it and you're in it and you're loving the experience right now. So share with us how to allow yourself to step into playing bigger instead of being content or complacent. Even if you're doing great where you are, you're making a lot of money, you're doing awesome with your business. How do you start to play bigger and be okay with that?
Amazing question, man. I spent the first 18 years of my life not knowing or not wanting people to know who I was. I spent the first 18 years of my life as somebody, in some respects, mentally speaking, 180 degrees different from the person that I am today. And this might surprise you because I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So, as you mentioned at the beginning, my parents came here from Egypt. They came here not really having any money, not even knowing the language, just having like a few people that they knew beforehand. Wow. And, I had a great childhood, everything like that. It was awesome when I look back at it, a lot of fun memories. But, When you place a kind of kid that was born in America in that kind of environment, you get a really interesting kind of person. So like I remember from like the youngest of ages, I was like a super crafty kid. Like I remember in second grade, I like went on TV for the first time. I won some kind of art competition. But despite that, I, had some health issues that started off as physical health issues that eventually transformed into mental health issues. So in most of my adolescence, man, I kind of spent it living in like a socially anxious prison in my mind. And of course, when these things are happening, you're sort of unconscious of it. So, I didn't really have any deep and meaningful best friends to have relationships with. I didn't put myself out there. I didn't play on like a certain sports team. I didn't really do much of anything. But what happened was I got on the internet when I was really young. To keep a story short, when I was 15 years old, I ended up playing this game called Minecraft. Video games were the thing that I loved doing. And I ended up starting this server, which is just this multiplayer place where people can join and play. And within 7 months, it ends up becoming the #1 Minecraft server in the world. I go from, and this is me at 15, I go from, this kid, immigrant background, didn't really, have too much money to, afford to like buy things that I want, to, making, hundreds of thousands of dollars, being quote unquote self-made. Like nobody told me to do this. I wasn't following a business plan. I didn't even know what the word entrepreneur meant. So I like made all this money. So I was externally successful, but I was still internally not so successful. And basically what this taught me, like going back to your question, is one, if I was 15 years old and I started the world's #1 Minecraft server, I lifted myself and me and my family out of poverty, and I like did so many crazy things, and I wasn't even conscious of it, and I wasn't, mentally speaking, as stable and developed as I am today. Whenever I think about that today, I'm like, holy crap, I can literally do anything. So that to me is one indicator, and another indicator that enables me to think bigger. I don't think that you can just think bigger. I think it's a process of, you've got to ask yourself certain self-inquisitive questions. But ultimately, what I think it comes down to is your identity. And the reason is like, we all know what we're supposed to be doing. Everyone in the world knows on some level that they should be working out, that they should lose their weight, or that they should, start another business or start a business, or get like 3 really great friends to hang out with on the weekend, or amend the bridges that you burned with like your family. Everyone knows what to do, but I think what actually stops us from doing it is, our thoughts, which is rooted to our emotions, which is rooted to, I think, what we're willing to do in a day. And the moment that you realize the discipline of yourself, what you do in your 24 hours every single day in a moment-to-moment basis is rooted in your discipline, which is rooted in your purpose, your life's reason for existing, which is rooted in your identity. So from ages, I want to say 18, 19, that's where I started to break out of the entire model of reality that I had built for myself for the first 18 years. And what actually happened was, as I began to expand my worldview, I began to seek out the truth, and I began to become really intentional about the conscious decisions that I was making every single day and the time that I spend. Like on my podcast, the first question that I ask all my guests is, how do you spend your time here on planet Earth? Because it is the biggest telltale indicator sign of who you actually are as a human being. So if you want to like figure out how do you achieve bigger, how do you go bigger, how do you constantly increase the stage, on the outside, it's by digging deeper down on who you are on the inside. And once you break through that emotional wall where you maybe become conscious that you have this belief. So when I was 18, I have this belief that I'm a socially anxious person. To make this a little bit more relevant, like a few months ago, I was just in the grocery store and I had like a realization of I have this belief of it doesn't matter what I'm doing, but on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment basis, it feels like whatever I'm doing is wrong. And then as you begin to uncover these things, you start to be like, wait, why do I even have that belief? Like, I don't even agree with that belief. And it's because you made that belief a long time ago to meet your emotional and psychological needs. I think it's all about constantly upgrading who you are, the why of who you are as a person, and then you will see that outward transformation in every aspect of your life. And that's been like the recurring thesis of how I've made everything in my life today in my eyes possible.
I appreciate all that insight and you sharing so much about your personal journey. A couple rapid fire questions for you. What was your parents' response, and were you confident or uncomfortable to say, hey, here's 200 grand from Minecraft? How did that go down?
My parents are like the most caring, biggest sweethearts that you'll ever meet.
That's awesome.
But here's the thing, man. Like they are kind of focused in their own thing, and smartphones are still pretty new if you think about it, right? Like I remember when I didn't have I remember when I didn't even have a phone, right?
They've only really been incredibly effective in the last 4 years.
Exactly. Well said. And like when you try to explain to somebody that didn't even have any of that stuff and like was born in the 50s and 60s, and you're like, we're now in a completely different income level. They really didn't know what to think of it at all. They always tried to, guide me on how to use it the best way, even though they weren't like business entrepreneurs or anything like that.
They were okay with it. They accepted it.
I mean, yeah, even at that age, I was stubborn. Like I was bullhorn. Whatever I'm going to do, I'm going to do it my way with my own hands. And they kind of knew that. So they understood to not get in the way of that, especially because it was something really good. And, I ended up taking a lot of that money and just like donating it into, different organizations that I tried to benefit. So it's not like I was doing crazy stuff with the money either. So it's like a very rational thing. And it made me on my own kind of like grow up in my own personal way because the fact that like my parents weren't like managing my finances or anything like that.
So you had to have made at least one fun purchase with it. So what was that?
When I look back at it, I didn't necessarily have like this one outrageous thing where I was like, all right, screw this. I'm going to, go haywire. Spending money like that was never really like a thing for me. Believe it or not, it wasn't something that I was ever motivated by, but I'd always just dumping my money in a bunch of bad crap. I go to the movies with my friends. I'm not saying the movies are a waste of money, although they could be, but I would spend like $4 to get this candy bar, $5 get this popcorn. So like it was always just like daily habitual stuff like that I don't really do anymore. And for me, I've really gotten strategic about where I spend my money, but I've never had like a major.
Let's transition into tips for really showing up or bringing it in a specific setting like a classroom. So explain a quick scenario, let's say program that you're calling into to speak to the class about virtual reality. Explain how someone can show up in that setting. Let's say you're calling in on Zoom or Skype and you're on the screen and you just have a classroom of kids who are listening to what you're saying. What is your main advice for really bringing it when you do that? Because you are influencing younger people.
I mean, first off, I would realize that I find that the main thing that I need to communicate to myself is that, bro, 10 years from now, or whatever it is, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, you could get an email or you could get a message or you could, I don't know, have somebody call you, show up to your door, whatever it is, and say, hey, Mark, you came to my high school when I was 15 and you talked about these things that I had never really heard in this way. And it really made me think differently. And more importantly, it made me actually do this thing. And now this thing is, you know, I don't know, just as an example, worth $400 million, and I want you to be an investor. So that's one example where I just think about like the hypotheticals of what could happen if I bring my best self into this, so that each person in there actually hears me as the human being that they are. Another great thing that I do, man, is I like to get a lot of context. I like to understand the backstory. So often I hop onto interviews, maybe a kind of business thing, maybe a client thing, where they just haven't done the research. And when you don't do the research, when you don't have the background on who you're talking to, you completely lose context. And in my opinion, any kind of advice, even anything that you say without context, is actually meaningless. So yeah, I mean, from somebody that went from not going to school that day, or like my pants in the bathroom beforehand, I could never give a presentation in my life, not just to a classroom or a stage reason, but just for people that I had never talked to. Like I would be freaked out by that. And the way that I did that was just by, one, understanding that like I'm not going to be confident. I'm not going to show up as my best self if I'm not actually doing something that I think is meaningful. So when I framed it in that way, that question of, oh, this person can, like, I can really have an impact on this person's life. And what I try to do is I try to imagine myself. I try to imagine the kid that I was.
Yeah.
Last month, I was talking to a high school group of 15 and 16-year-olds. So I'd literally imagine myself in high school as that freshman or sophomore. And when you do that, man, you gain, even if you haven't done the context on each person, the research, you gain unbelievable context, because then you start thinking, wait, wow. So I remember when other people, other speakers, quote unquote, or whether it was even a teacher that came to my school and said some random crap and nobody paid attention to, you begin to see that. So you're like, oh, what would I say that would actually make one of these kids just wait, what did he just say? Like I remember when I was talking to them, I was like, listen, guys, I told them like my whole story. I was like, literally, like I thought of myself as a loser when I was sitting here in these if I was sitting here in this auditorium, I would sit by myself and I would constantly think about the person sitting left and right to me, what they were thinking. Wow. And just like a bunch of like intimate things that like a lot of kids go through. And like once they hear that, especially when they don't hear it a lot on like TV or their parents, especially, or the other kids around them, that's what make them go. And the other thing that I would say is, yeah, you've got to have the context, you got to have the intention. And for me, once you have those two pieces, it's really all about the stories that you tell. And a good way to think about it is this. So I talked to New York Times bestselling author Jay Henricks. He basically wrote the book on rhetoric, language itself. He wrote How to Argue. And he talks about this strategy, this method that the ancient Greeks and Romans used to do a long time ago when they were on stage, because oftentimes people were drunk all the time. So there would be hecklers. And when somebody was talking about something, they would jump in, they would yell random stuff. And what would happen is the person would, if they memorized something or if they had like an outline of what they were going to do, they would lose track of what they were saying. So what they did was they developed this strategy called a memory palace. And what it would be is you would visualize like this house that has a hallway and that has rooms and that has, things in the hallway as well. And basically what I mean is you treat it as a pathway in your brain and how you're going to walk through yourself and the stage. So all those little rooms would be stories. So for me, in my example, I talked about my own story, but as I began to branch out and get into the actual content, I actually began to hop into the stories of the people that I've interviewed. So the first story that I popped into was this guy named Naveen Jain. And I told them, I knew Naveen Jain's story beforehand, and I'd say, hey guys, he grew up 3 years old in India, didn't have any kind of money, didn't have any ambition, didn't have any opportunity. But the one thing he would do is he would look up at the moon every day, and he would look at the moon and he would say, I'm going to get there one day. And, for those of you that don't know, today he's a billionaire. He actually has a space company that's going to the moon. So as you have these stories in your brain, you start to treat them as a path. And it's like, okay, I'm going to walk through this story to teach people through that Naveen Jain story of the true factors of success and how it doesn't matter what your gender, where you were born, what you look like, what your family does. It doesn't matter any of those things. It just matters what you actually do with your time. That was the main lesson that we took out of Naveen Jain's story. And there was also some other things. So to me, it's really about a balance of having a set of stories that you have like embedded in your mind that you can figure out as an angle and then just walk through them. And then also, in terms of speaking, especially for new speakers, it's also about understanding that not everyone's face in the audience is going to be like mind blown because people process things differently. For example, I would look at some kids' faces and like I could see like they've never heard this before. Like they're making the facial expressions, they're blowing their mind. Yeah. Some other kids
the other ones
be
were
like
asleep.
half dozing, half like it seemed like they were literally bored out of their freaking minds. But here's the thing. One of those kids that looked like they were bored out of their freaking mind came up to me after and said, dude, one of the stories you shared, it was of a former NFL player and how he came from nothing and just kind of grinded his way out too. He was like, dude, I want to be a professional football player too. And his scenario actually matched the same scenario as the story of the NFL player that I talked about. So like through that, it's like it's not clear. Some people just have different faces when they're processing stuff. So I think that's cool, and I hope that worked out. What do you think?
I think it's great advice. I'm in a speaking course right now online. It's through Creative Live. Chase Jarvis founded Creative Live. The course is great. The guy who's teaching it is speaking on the hard truth of the best thing for anyone who's self-conscious about speaking is to get over yourself because it's not about you. The audience really doesn't care. What gets me is sometimes I'll choke up because I will be struggling with how enthusiastic I am to get to speak to podcast audience or a classroom or whatever it is, probably within the next 2 months in January. So I don't want to show up there and be choked up because I'm not shy, I'm not scared, and I'm not self-conscious. I'm just so enthusiastic that my voice starts to clamp up and I get a little bit choked up sometimes.
Yeah, to me, what comes to mind when you say that is, as somebody that is naturally me, typically more anxious, typically more nervous, typically more insecure, the anxiety energy that I have, actually works towards my favor. And I get like a whirlwind of words to say. And as long as you guide it in the right way, you can control it. Now, the other thing that I would say about that is like, the fact that I have that makes me perform well. I know some people that don't have that. They are not nervous. They are not anxious in any way. They know what they're going to say, but still they feel like they don't really deliver. They feel like they don't show up 110% as themselves. And as somebody who's naturally nervous, that's just better naturally for me because since I am like super naturally insecure, man, whenever people are gonna sit in front of me and listen, that literally blows my mind. Like I'm literally so freaking grateful. Like even if it is kids, even if it is like part of like their assembly or their classroom and they actually have to be there, same thing works as a podcast, man. The fact that somebody would want to take 45 minutes out of their life instead of hanging out with their family, instead of like building their business. They want to listen to you and more importantly, your guest, because I think that's where it actually is. Like the fact that they want to do that is just ridiculous, man. So for me, whenever I think about the gratitude side of that, it's like the ultimate jet fuel.
For sure. I'm with you. You are a heavy hitter in the podcasting space and you earned it. You've been patient. You've been consistent. So how do you continue to show up? Who were some of your favorite, well, let's just say some of your most famous guests that you've hosted on your podcast, Humans 2.0, and how did you continue to show up? Are you 21 or 22?
21.
So you're 21 years old. You're showing up as a young person, and you're not allowing age to be a discriminatory factor for you. You continue to show up with confidence and with enthusiasm.
in terms of anything that I do, the podcasting, the business, the speaking, investing, anything that I do in those realms, it literally feels like I'm playing a video game.
True.
And the reason why I say that is I haven't had a struggle in those areas yet. And the reason is when I was in the journey and still am the process of finding myself and creating a better version, the human 2.0 version of myself, that was and is the biggest struggle. That is the thing for me. So when it comes to these other things, this is just like the same way that I go to the gym. You know what I mean? And the other way that I'll answer that question is what I've learned, and it took me a while to figure this out. As I started interviewing like so many legends, so many greats, so many people that I had actually read their book before, and now I'm talking to them. And I've even gotten the pleasure of advancing those relationships even further into business opportunities, helping each other out, talking to them as a human, being good friends with them. What's actually happened, man, is I have adopted the mindset of the unstoppable. I have adopted these certain people, these certain teachings, lessons as literally like archetypes, as wallpapers in my mind. So when I'm like interviewing people like, as you know, Ed Milet or Seth Godin or Gretchen Rubin or Don Jose Ruiz or any of these ridiculous people, like in a good way, obviously. It's like
these creeps.
It's like the biggest reaffirmer. It's like the biggest, dude, you need to keep going, put out that podcast interview, do this thing, reach out to this person. And, you know, it was all a series of steps. So it doesn't really happen to me that much anymore, but it still does happen. But there are days where I'm like, I don't even want to put out a podcast. Like, wait, should I put out this podcast episode? Oh, what are people going to think about it? Are people going to view this the wrong way? Are people going to listen to it? That stuff happens all the time. To be totally honest with you, man. So my podcast is daily, and I made that decision all the way back in August. And 2 weeks after that, it hit the top 100 list. But the reason why I hit it daily, man, is like I've got to be doing this stuff every day. And kind of on a similar note, interrupt me if this is off topic, but I interviewed this guy. His name is David Meltzer. Fantastic person. I highly recommend you interview him on this podcast. John, he's a great guy. He was CEO of the world's first smartphone. He also ran the biggest notable sports agency in the world, Sports One Marketing. And this is, if you ever seen that movie, Jerry Maguire, this is literally what they based the movie off of. Okay. And he came on my podcast and he told me about this thing called the zero effect. And he says that so many people, you know, he talks to that say, I'm doing everything that I'm supposed to. I'm doing it all the time, but I still can't get any results in my life. And life has this exponential multiplying effect where if you do something every day, you gain x to the first power, and then the next day it's x to the second power, and the next after that it's x to the third power, fourth power. And the thing with exponentials is it grows not linearly, so not 1, 2, 3, 4, but eventually it is, 1, 2, and then it's 4, and then it's 8, and then it's 16, and then it's 32. And that's how you actually get success in your life. The success, the work that happens, the result actually becomes exponential towards what you're working on. But where most people miss out on is they do x to the first power, x to the second power, x to the third power, and then they
take Thursday and
on
Friday
the weekend. Off. Exactly. Or on the weekend, they get up with their friends or whatever it is. They stop doing that thing. They stop. And like, this isn't even necessarily about like doing the same thing, man. This is about the mindset. This is about your thoughts. I want to say this, and this might be a little bit off topic, but I just really want people to understand something. And it's what I'm doing is not a game. I'm sure the podcast, the business, it kind of does feel like a game to me, and like that's cool. But in terms of like my life, what I'm doing in a moment-to-moment basis, that is not a game for me. I know how bad it can get. I've felt it before. And when you do that, you really just like begin to understand how freaking important this stuff is, man. There is literally not a single moment of the day where I wake up or I'm doing something and I'm like, I guess this whole, success, growth stuff isn't for me. And it's like when you approach it with such intensity, and the best way I can relate it is like if you've ever seen one of those nature videos of like that lion running after the gazelle, and like where the lion is literally right behind the gazelle and they're both running as fast as they can. And if you look at these videos, you can see the look on the lion's face. You can see how fast his muscles are moving in every second, and not even for a second he's getting slower down. But that's the mindset that I approach everything in my life, because personally, man, for me, that's the way that I need to operate. Because for me, what I've learned is I'm either 0 or 100. Wow. If I tell myself, Mark, I'm just going to take it easy today, I'm going to live a 99% of my potential, nothing is getting done, man. I'm going to have regrets. I'm going to feel pain in my own way. So the way that I really love living life, it's the human 2.0 version. It's when you're literally trying to leverage every millisecond of time towards what you want to make happen in the world for yourself, the people around you, the people that you don't even know yet, for today, tomorrow, 10 years and 20 years, and for the rest of the conceivable future. So that's my operating system, man.
Mark, I appreciate that. Mark OS, and I really hope that some of you guys decide to download at least aspects of that operating system to your personal mindset as you listen. Mark, I look at it like it's not even an option. And when I started to approach my calling, I believe it's a calling, my purpose, my why, when I look at my whys, I look at that like it's my moral obligation or ethical duty to do my best to achieve that. It's for people you don't even know yet as well. I started my podcast just this past June, and it's caused me to really step up and show up for other people more so than I ever have before in my past. I haven't missed a week. I've been consistent. I started posting twice a week.
Awesome. Is there any way I could add on something?
Please, go ahead.
Okay. Kind of on that similar note, so somebody that I've learned a lot from is this guy named Dr. Jordan Peterson. I'm sure you've heard of him. A lot of other people have heard of him.
A lot of people are obsessed with him right now. The 12
exactly.
Rules book?
Okay. Yeah, and this is the case that he points for like the importance of this stuff, and I'll try to do it real quick. So in the last century, our like not the 21st century, but the 20th century, in the 1900s, we saw some destruction and tyranny and death and murder on a scale that we've never in history seen before. I think a lot of this was because the technology that was being formed was kind of in the beginning days, where we couldn't necessarily invent a technology of the internet for every single human being to connect, to actually understand that we're all human beings too. So the only people that did have technology were people like or groups of people like governments that had access to propaganda to put on TV, newspapers, and then also weapons of mass destruction. That's when they were also being formed.
Okay.
Jordan Peterson lays out the case that the reason why all like this destruction happened, this carnage, was because the individual character, each person's character's integrity was not at 100%. Because what happened was the people that were committing these horrible things, man, they were people. I don't know what to say. They were literally normal people, just like, your dad, my mom, my dad's uncle, like just completely normal people that ended up doing these horrible things. And it's because human nature is not always meant for love, peace, and happiness. Human nature is, in my opinion, good. But depending on the circumstances, depending on the environment, it can push us to go in a lot of different survival modes. And when you're trying to imagine the mindset of the people of the 20th century, dude, you did not know another idea that you did not see in front of you. You did not have the ability to read 12 Rules for Life. You know what I mean? You did not have the ability to listen to Ed Milet or a podcast. Whatever you saw whatever you heard in front of you is most likely what you ended up thinking towards. So all of these people, all these Nazis, all these Soviet Union army imperialists, all these, they were just totally normal people that let themselves slip in one way or another. And if you look at communism, the main operating systems that enabled this stuff happened, the main stuff in communism, from my understanding, is not about the individual. It's about the group. So if you let yourself slip, you as an individual, in whatever way that you define that as, you're not just doing a disservice to yourself, but you're doing a disservice to the world. And in the 20th century, that's where we saw all of that stuff play out, and it costed the world hundreds of millions of lives. So that's like a real layer, in my opinion, in my perspective, that really just like seals the deal of the ramifications of the stuff. And also at the same time, get out there and have fun and laugh and make sure you have an existential humor, because that's super, super important too.
That. I really like that humor aspect. Personally, I believe that all of us are born with the ability and capability to do desperately wicked things, as well as love unconditionally. And I think a big part of Jordan Peterson's teaching there is the importance on really stepping up into what we see is possible in the best ways. So building routines, following routines, stepping up into our greatest potential, and doing it almost with a fervor and a vigor that reflects the belief we are not even seeing it as optional, but if we don't, it's detrimental to not only ourselves and everyone in our circle of influence and then those outer ripple spheres, but also the society as a whole. And I think that's really powerful. I want to ask you, Mark, what causes for your podcast specifically, you mentioned you started daily posting, you said August, is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. So before August.
Or no, sorry, June.
Okay. I know you're good at telling stories. You've done a few already on this episode. I'm trying to implement that and be better at that, because here's a funny story, actually. Last night, I was telling the Gandhi story about how the mom brings her son to him, and then to tell the son to stop eating sugar, and then he says, come back next week, and she has to travel 3 days per trip or something like that. She's like, why didn't you just tell him the first time? And Gandhi said, because I was eating sugar, so I had to stop. That story. So before I told your son to stop eating sugar. So I told my friend this story, and he was like loving it. And then I told him the punchline when she asked Gandhi, why didn't you tell him the first time? And he laughed, and he was like, oh, that is such a good story. And I realized I had heard that probably 3 different, and I've overheard it many times. But when I told my friend, I realized that there's such power in story and narrative. If you would explain what caused your podcast to take off. The reason I ask, my motivation is selfish, yes, but I also want, one of the biggest visions for my podcast is to help good, generous people see they're capable of so much more than the way they're living. I think truly loving people who are incredibly generous are simultaneously struggle with self-esteem or the belief that they can do it, or the belief that they should step up and that they do belong on that stage and their message matters and things like that. So I really will aim to encourage these people who are quietly very generous but have so much more to give to see that they are possible. What they want to do is completely possible and matters, and their dreams matter because they matter. What caused your podcast to take off? How are you getting so much unsolicited positive feedback? Was that really kickstarted by daily posting?
So I started my podcast, the Humans 2.0 podcast, in August of 2017. And I started it as sort of, my own way, my own sort of journey, the beginning of a conquest to sort of, continue my understanding of the world. And I realized that, I don't have any of the answers. I don't have anything. So I need to learn and potentially get those answers, or maybe form even better questions from the people that are walking the walk today. Yeah. So I started it, not super laser focused or anything like that. I reached out to people in my network, just kind of like really small stuff. Didn't really take it seriously until the beginning of this year in January. And the realization behind that was like I had something like 15 episodes up, something like that. And I can already sort of detect more opportunities I'm going to call myself an entrepreneur for my entire life, having that ability to detect when something, like when I feel like something's right. And I had that feeling with this podcast. So imagine if I, went all in. Like imagine what that could do for me. I went into January 1st with, the model that I told you of at the very beginning of this podcast of, life won't always go my way, but I'll always find a way. And I just started posting out interviews a lot. And I ended up posting like 3 interviews a week. And as that started to unfold, I just started to, learn better and bigger things. So for example, episode 36 or 32, I interviewed this guy named Quentin Allums. And there I talked to him, and he was a big LinkedIn guy. He runs like this company, like this marketing story agency that's a part of LinkedIn. And he told me his entire story of how he was negative $900 in the bank, and then how he just like hustled, got his life together, used LinkedIn as a really great platform. So I was like, okay. So I started to go on LinkedIn. I started posting more consistently. It took me a while to see results, but eventually that's a big, big portion of how my podcast grew and how I was able to get bigger and bigger guests. And then, I had on this other guy on my podcast, episode 39, I believe. His name is Kyle Mogid, and he was on Gary Vee's team, his content team. And after the interview went up, the podcast was up, him and I were talking later on, and he was like, dude, you've got to start making micro content like on your Instagram, on your LinkedIn to get people to listen to your podcast. So I don't even remember when he came on. I want to say it was like January, February. And like I just started implementing one thing at a time. And eventually I started to just like reach up to higher and higher guests. I started promoting it more through that micro content that I was doing on LinkedIn and Instagram and getting cooler guests. And when you do that, you start to get word of mouth. And in March, that's when I started to see like my podcast starting to get some results, like in terms of the top charts. Now, the other thing that I'll say is, man, if you want to influence anybody to do anything, whether it's your podcast listeners or your mom, you've got to lead by action. Nobody's going to do anything if you tell them to do it. The way that they do it is they see you doing something differently, whether it's developing yourself, showing up. And then once they see that, they're like, oh, wait, I can do that too. So then they start doing that with themselves. That's how you actually do it. And I'll say the last point on this is, so when I started my podcast, I was 20. Yeah, I was 20. Or I had just turned 20. I'm not Seth Godin. I'm not Ed Milet. I don't have any kind of life experience. I don't have any – I mean, I do have life experience.
Right.
I don't have any tips and tricks. Exactly, right? Exactly. So gotcha. What I see a lot of people today that whether they're young, whether they're not, whether they're young, whether they're not, they – think that like they need to be Gary Vaynerchuk or they think they need to be Tim Ferriss. And the matter of the fact is you don't need to be anybody. And they got to where they are after a ridiculous amount of work and failing and doing the same thing and different things over and over and over again and falling down on their face. So I approached it in the sense of, okay, I know nothing. I am just going to take a seat at the table. And if I can facilitate some sort of a conversation between the smart guy or woman that I'm talking to and the audience, not myself, but to use myself as a conduit for the audience's understanding. So like what I mean is this, you'll have a guest on, they'll say something for 4 minutes, like this blur. And then some people will say, yeah, okay. But what I've realized is if you're the most authentic, if you're the most honest, and you're pretending as if like you're having a dope conversation with like a really smart friend of yours, but also at the same time, be mindful that, let's say if you're trying to visualize this out, you and your friend are sitting at a table, you guys are having a real intuitive conversation, and you're going to place a recorder or you're going to hit record on your iPhone, or you're going to put it in the center of the table. Now you've got to be mindful of the other people listening. So when you're having the conversation with that person and they go on, they talk for 4 or 5 minutes, the audience is listening. And some people process things differently. I know for me, it kind of takes me a while. So when the host triples down on a question or maybe on something that the guest said, it actually simulates my own thinking through the host's thinking. So in my opinion, whether you're young or you're old or you're engaging in a field where you don't really know a lot about, which in my opinion is everything. I actually don't believe in the concept of an expert in some cases. So when you approach it from that scenario and you are genuinely the curious learner, a lot of other people listening will have some kind of value taken out of that. And what ends up happening is, your name starts to get associated with all the other guests that you do, and people start to see you as a person of value and, more importantly, trust, right? It's the reason why Tim Ferriss is where he is. He's known as the curator now of information. So he's interviewed all these hundreds, if not thousands of people. And in his mindset, he's gotten the best information out there. And now he's a messenger to the people. So those are kind of my thoughts. And I think that's actually what makes people successful. And other than that, I really want to say that, the success of your podcast, in my opinion, is based on the relationship that the audience member has with you and the host. That's not to say that the podcast is about you. That's not to say that the reason why people are listening is just for you. A part of it is because of you, because they've associated you in their mind as a trustworthy person. And when you have a daily podcast and the person, let's tie this back in. When the person gets to listen to you every day, going back to David Meltzer's zero effect, it also begins to have similar aspects on how that person treats you. So when the podcast episode is over, they're not actually more inclined to listen to it, but they're actually more inclined to do stuff and actually take action in their own lives because they know who you are as a person, and gives them all the more opportunity and permission and willingness to reach out to you, the host, after the conversation and maybe talk about other ways that you guys can help each other. So that's really where I think it is, man. And it's other than that, it's all about the community. It's all about involving your listeners, all the other people, into all the different various aspects of your life, and not necessarily from the perspective of, I'm going to do this in order to, write this book or go on this speaking tour or sell this thing, but just from the perspective of, bro, you're a human being that, for lack of a better word, I hope I can say this, but I can with for the rest of my life. And I know you're not going to try to pull some cheap move, or you're going to quit your podcast and stop. So it's approaching it from that life journey. At least that's what I try to do. And I think it's been working, and there's always ways that I can improve. But yeah, man, I think that's the most important stuff.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Mark. Anything else?
I'm not a big fan of formulas. I'm not a big fan of you just follow this 3-step system to completely change your life around. But if I could really give you 3 steps that I've at least used, that I've always come back to even to this day when I'm looking for a big change or a big pivot in my life, I always say this. Number 1, take responsibility. Meaning you understand the implications of your actions, and you actually understand that this whole life thing is in your hands. It's not in the governments. It's not in your families. It's not, the gender or the race or the location that you were born in. Number 2, take action. You can't just think your way out of this. You can't just continue talking about it with all your friends. You actually have to put your foot or your hand down and actually do something about it. And last but not least, just find a way. This is usually done by repeating steps 1 and 2, but in my opinion, this is how the game works. And to me, it's all about being a grateful learner, because when you really appreciate yourself and have the self-worth in you as being a learner, any obstacle, any issue you can go around. It does not matter. So that's what I'd leave. And John, thank you so much for having me, man. This has been awesome.
Mark, for sure. I was actually not aiming to end the interview there.
Okay.
I appreciate that, Mark. And what I'm asking specifically then is all of the stuff that you just shared, brother, with the growing your podcast and being a curious listener and a learner and being that conduit for the audience is 100% aligned with the approach I've had with this. And I think that's why there's been any level of minuscule success thus far. So I'm more inclined now, though, to do the micro content. When you say micro content for Instagram and LinkedIn, what are the things that you found to be most effective?
Yeah, I mean, here's what I'll say. So I don't know if I 100% agree with this, but it has been said that debatably, micro content is actually more important than your content on your podcast. And the reason is, man, is if we go back to, what we talked about being grateful, if you, in my opinion, if you talk in a microphone and upload it on the internet, whether it's you or you and your guest, if you think that somebody randomly on the internet is going to stumble across that and be like, wow, I'm going to take 45 minutes out of my life to listen to this podcast, even though I've literally never listened to it.
No.
I think that's delusional. And I think in a world where there's never been more competition, that just doesn't work. So in terms of micro content, man, it's just about communicating whatever it is to get people to listen to a podcast episode in a 60-second video, in a quote picture, in an article, in just like a text post, just like trying to communicate whatever it is as sort of a magnet to attract people. And when you do make that kind of micro video and you leave people with like 60 seconds of your guest talking of valuable information, then they're like, oh, wow. So if I listen to this 45-minute interview, like I wonder how many other nuggets that I can get out of it. So that's why I think it's super important.
100% with you there. You said also it's based on the relationship the audience member has with you, because they associate you with a trustworthy person, so they'll be more inclined to actually take action and change their life. So I'm having trouble engaging the audience. At least I feel like I am. And it could just be because I'm in the early stages. It could be that I need to, and like I said, I've been consistent, genuine, curious learner. I'm not a know-it-all whatsoever. I try to learn every episode. So how can I better involve my listeners to where they feel more involved in a community?
It's all about just starting the conversation. That's really what I think the game is about in whatever way that you try to do it out. I'm sorry. You know what I'm doing right now, man? I'm actually trying to search. Do you have a LinkedIn account?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, man. I'm just looking at it because this is how I say to involve your conversation. At the end of all of your podcasts or at the beginning, whatever you find works well for you, tell people, yo, go connect with me if you found this beneficial on, whatever social media platform. And then I'll just start posting every day in whatever form, whether that's in terms of the connecting with your audience, in terms of LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, an email list, whatever it is, just find that open communication form, because podcasting is not like social media. It is not a two-way communication platform. It's just the person downloads the episode and they listen to it. But you need the feedback. You need whatever it is. Even if they talk about it, they post it up on their Instagram story, you need all of that stuff. So if you need to start the conversation first. I guess that's what I'm saying.
And you think LinkedIn is one of the best things?
Yeah, I would be putting, in terms of my social media time, that's where I'd be putting like 85% of my time.
Okay. If you could go back in time, what would you tell your younger self and why? If you saw him sitting on a park bench, think of the younger, insecure Mark who is still in pre-Minecraft zone and just isn't sure what's going to happen.
Yeah, and even during the Minecraft zone, I still don't know what's going to happen, and even today. But
okay.
but here's what I would say, man, and I love this question. I probably actually wouldn't tell him anything, but I would probably just say, I'm super proud of you, bro. Just keep going. And the reason is, when I started to become conscious of the ways that I was living my life, and all of the ways that I was hiddenly like resentful about, like, oh, why me? Why did my life go this way? Why did this happen? Why am I like this, and that? I actually started to realize that the reason why, whatever you call it, was actually the person that made me do the things that I was younger for, the objectively speaking bad, because it actually made me into the person that I am today. Because I learned from a very young age that you can't go to the top. You can't become the best that's ever done this before if you have the same mindset, habits, tools, thought process as everyone else. And so when I went through those things through my younger years and my adolescence, that was actually the systematic stripping of toxicity that I needed for my soul in order for me to actually build the foundation of success that I have today. So, man,
framework.
Exactly. It was a framework, but sometimes that framework requires 10 years of eating shit and doing the same thing over and over again, because every time you do it, it makes you just a little bit stronger. So that's the way it is, man.
Well said, Mark Metry. Thanks so much for being on. Tell my audience how they can connect with you.
Just look me up, Mark Metry. Look up my podcast, Humans 2.0. And Jonathan, dude, thank you so much for having me on. Your podcast is awesome, and this has been a blast. Woo!
Congratulations on making it to the end of this episode. What about this episode stood out to you? Next, I need your help sharing this show. I want this podcast to impact and reach 6,000 people per episode by August 31st, 2019. And I want us to reach 15,000 people per month by March 29th, 2020. Have you been enjoying multiple episodes of The Heart Healthy Hustle? I'm thrilled to share with you an exclusive invitation to join our new Facebook community. To get to know other Heart Healthy Hustlers, simply go to thehearthealthyhustle.com/Facebook, where you can expect to see different members of our community being featured weekly in Facebook Live calls. I appreciate all of your love and support, and I will see you in the next episode. As always, be generous on every occasion. There is a story for you, and live wide open.